Aperture.
Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Michael Famighetti. I'm the editor of Aperture magazine. For those of you who are not familiar with Aperture, the magazine was founded in 1952 by a group of artists, writers, and curators as a common ground for photography. Aperture today is a multi-platform publisher that unites the photography community in print, in person, and online. Aperture is a not-for-profit publication, and support for the magazine is provided by the Kanakia Foundation, by John Stryker and Slobodan Randilovich, and by Thomas and Susan Dunn. Further generous support is provided by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and Aperture's programs are made possible in part by the New York State Council on the Arts. The easiest and most pleasurable way to support Aperture is to simply subscribe or buy individual issues of the magazine, and you can see a link in the chat to do so. Today, we are very excited to be joined by Alec Soth, guest editor of our summer issue titled Sleepwalking. I'm sure that Alec needs no introduction to this audience, but he is a photographer born and based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He has published over 25 books and has had over 50 solo exhibitions. In 2008, Soth created Little Brown Mushroom, a multimedia enterprise focused on visual storytelling. He is also a member of Magnum Photos. It is easy to imagine Alec daydreaming in pictures. As an acclaimed photographer, teacher, publisher, YouTuber, now TikToker, and one-time blogger, he is as dedicated to thinking about what pictures mean as he is to making them. Since his acclaimed 2004 debut series, Sleeping by the Mississippi, a project he described not as a chronicle of a place, but as an excuse to wander, he has made lyrical bodies of work, modest meditations on consciousness that parse the surfaces of the everyday. I tried to create projects that allow me to change course and follow my nose, he says, of his process that is driven by a search for serendipity. As guest editor, Alec wanted to pursue a theme that wouldn't constrain him. The issue I wanted to edit, he said, is one in which I'm always surprised to turn the page. I want to see images of the real world, good old descriptive photographs that tap into the logic of dreams. I want the reader to feel like they are sleepwalking. So please join me in welcoming Alec Soth. Alec, you here?
Hello, I'm here. They should have like a curtain that opens.
They
for
should.
Moments like this.
We need a little bit of drama because especially we're bringing people behind the curtains, so to speak, of how this issue of the magazine came together. So first, thank you so much, Alec, for being such a fantastic collaborator on this issue of the magazine. I feel like we've been trying to rope you in as a guest editor for literally years. So it was great that it finally worked out.
Well, I didn't know that, but thank you. I mean, it is I mean, an incredible honor. And I've been saying, I mean, ever since the redesign of the magazine, it's just been on such a high level. I think I was maybe I was on the last issue of the old design.
And 2012, right?
Yeah. And then it like came to life as this new extravagant, just so chock full of information. So happy to be part of it. Yeah.
No, thank you for lending your brain for this special issue of the magazine and for being here today to speak with our audience. And it looks like from the numbers here, we have a really great crowd. And I'm sure it's people are tuning in from around the world. So here is the cover of the issue. But Nolan, maybe we can go to the first slide. But actually, maybe before we jump into this interview with Siri Husted, Alec, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how, I'm curious if you could speak about how you arrived at this idea for a theme. Is this a concept that you've been carrying around for some time and this was an opportunity? Was this a kind of an idea that was keeping you up at night?
I mean, it's a concept that I carried around for myself, for my own work, but no, I get when I was asked to be involved in this, I was, as you know, I was suddenly terrified because I was like, what's the theme? You know, and it's and I jokingly talked to you about doing a Minnesota theme, you know, which was a joke. But
which could be a good theme too.
No, but I didn't know I didn't know how. And this brings me back to when when I was starting off as a photographer and writing grants, writing for grants, and it's like I don't know if I want to do a project on this specific subject. Like I crave open-endedness. And so then it's how do you package open-endedness? And I ended up doing that with Sleeping by the Mississippi. And it's like cheating. It's like having dreams and sleep as a way to make it more expansive. And so I really employed the same strategy here, which is not to say that, and really it's like sleep and dreams in that world. It's not specifically sleepwalking, but that's just a more poetic way of putting it, I guess.
Right. What you kind of just are tapping into is one of the kind of questions that I think we confront with every issue of the magazine is like, a theme gives you an architecture for an issue. It gives you a way to organize ideas. It gives you a way to kind of structure things. And as editors, it allows you to kind of, focus in different directions, which helps you organize your work. But at the same time, we're always looking for this balance between wanting themes that are capacious enough to allow us to publish a really kind of extended and diverse selection of work.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting for people who are listening to this too, to imagine their own, like what they would do, and because it's a fun little exercise and not getting pinned down by your own ideas, so and leaving that space to be open, which you guys definitely did. And it was interesting with Siri here in this conversation that we had. I think at first she was ready to like go deep dive on sleepwalking as a phenomenon. And then we just opened it up a great deal. And the work that we talked about almost entirely was my most recent book, A Pound of Pictures, which is not a book about sleepwalking or even sleep, but it references a bit of that like dream logic. I think it was in yesterday's New York Times, where there was, how in the book review they have that interview with an author at the beginning, and I think it was in that one where he was talking about he felt sort of guilty about listening to an audiobook and recommending that experience, but he said it's like being in the car and driving and listening to a book, you like move inside of it. And he might have even said this dream like quality. And that is this feeling I have on the road. And so this picture of my assistant sleeping in the car like speaks a little bit to that.
Well, I was curious about also just to go back to Sleeping by the Mississippi. I think when you first wrote me, I have to say, as a guest editor, you were so organized in your thinking for the issue. I mean, you sent really kind of crisp outline of an idea, but then also a very clear list of people you thought might be interesting to include. But you also mentioned that to kind of explain your thinking around this idea of sleepwalking and dream states and kind of wandering as part of your creative process. You talked about how in Sleeping by the Mississippi, instead of referencing the riverboat pilot Mark Twain, the epigraph of your book described the hallucinations of Charles Lindbergh during his 33-hour transatlantic flight. And you mapped out this idea of this kind of space between it's like a kind of liminal space between being asleep and wakefulness. And I'm curious about how that figures into your practice just in general, like in Sleeping by the Mississippi, but also A Pound of Pictures.
A Pound of Pictures. And I mean, it's funny because this happened to me recently. I'm in the phase of daydreaming about whatever I'm going to do next. And so I did this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I did all this brainstorming before bed. And I've had this happen many times. It's like the stuff is swirling around and I wake up and I'm like, that. And there is this way in which your brain is working when you're asleep. And I definitely use that. And it's such a contradiction in some ways to photography, which is so utterly specific to the world. And it seems like it shouldn't apply, but then, I mean, so look at this picture on the screen. It's a photograph, obviously, of a person no longer here. And so the pictures get filled up with kind of imaginary information. We imagine what the life of this person might be. And what I love about it is that you can't read anything about him, that the photograph was more durable than the stone. And so you fill up this picture with some sort of idea of who this man was. And that's the space that I like in photography, is kind of mixing specificity with this kind of dreamy open-endedness.
Mm-hmm. Like in this picture of
exactly. It's funny. It's like such a weird picture, and it has very specific meaning to me, and it probably means lots of different things to other people. But were you the one? What's that?
Do you want to elaborate on the specific meaning for you?
Well, this particular project, A Pound of Pictures, in the beginning, it was a whole project about Abraham Lincoln and his funeral train and his body being carried across the country. I abandoned that project, and yet I sort of kept Lincoln around as an idea. And I would still visit Lincoln spots, even though I wasn't doing a project about it. And then at the very end of the last trip, I don't know how many I took, but it was the last day of the last trip. I found online this bust for sale, and it was like a celebration of this. And so Lincoln lives on with me. Also, incidentally, in those briefcases behind him are photographs that I collect as I travel. And actually, I had those with me because I had been doing a performance at Mass MoCA. So like, all this meaning that no one would ever bring to the picture but me. And so I wasn't sure if this was a just for me photograph. That's a hard thing to figure out, but in fact, it's out there in the world now.
But I feel like, coming back to the idea of sleepwalking, I feel like in some ways, when you talk about it, especially in the interview and the issue with Siri, it almost is a kind of, I don't know, it's almost like a kind of sense of creative freedom. And you just talked about kind of ditching one idea about following Lincoln's 1865 funeral train. And like, is that just, at what point do you know in a project, this isn't working, I need to shift gears and move to something else? Like, this feels forced.
Oh, yeah. Well, what's interesting is it kind of speaks to that very issue of like organizing a theme, because I had this idea, this theme, and then it just felt like I was illustrating it. And once I felt like I was doing that was when I had to let go. One other thing just came to mind is that the project wasn't directly inspired by George Saunders' book, Lincoln in the Bardo, but it was kind of linked. And in that book, it's Lincoln in this in-between state, actually. So it's similar to what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, should we move into this series of pictures that you sent us? Because you actually sent us, so just so viewers are clear, that the next few pictures are not from A Pound of Pictures.
Not incorrect.
Oh, that is true. How many are from Pound of Pictures?
Actually, I think most of them are from A Pound of Pictures. Because so A Pound of Pictures ended up becoming kind of about photography and my own photographic process. And as part of that, I kind of pay homage to great photographers that have inspired me. And so the previous was Sophie Calle, and here we have Dwayne Michals, and in both. So Sophie Calle I'd met once very briefly a long time ago, but had the opportunity to visit her. It's kind of a funny story. She's decided to always spend Sunday in bed whenever she can. And she was in San Francisco and spending the day in bed. And I asked if I could visit and bring my daughter as well. And they had an amazing conversation. Dwayne Michaels was just someone I wanted to meet, and photography is like an excuse to meet people. Mm-hmm. And he had a show at the Morgan that I was really touched by, and and so I asked to meet him, and it was just incredible. And we'll talk about him later, but and he's in this kind of death pose. I mean, both of those pictures could be dead people, right? And there's a lot of mortality in this work. Anyway, there he is, the legend.
And so Sophie Calle takes visitors even during.
I don't know if she normally takes visitors.
I think you get a special visa for this.
I knew she had. This was in San Francisco. I knew she was in town because she was at Fraenkel Gallery, and I'd asked if I could meet with her. I mean, I should tell you. So I did a trade with her many years ago, and the photograph that she acquired was this picture at the beginning of Dog Days Bogota of my daughter as a baby, which is not a picture that I ever sold. And I loved this idea. I wanted my daughter to meet her. And so that was the draw, and we had an incredible conversation. So the last picture was of Nancy Rexroth, and that was actually from my previous book. And then this is a photograph of Nan Goldin's bed with Peter Hujar pictures behind her bed, and which is relevant to this issue as well.
And incidentally, those pictures didn't make it into the issue, because I think we realized at a certain point that we had maybe too many pictures of beds, or too many pictures that were like kind of straightforward vacation connected to sleep. But I'm just curious about those pictures, because I feel like there's a good deal of writing on photographers at work, and photographers are often portrayed in action. Like you created this subgenre of photographers at sleep, or connected to sleep, and you talk a little bit about why you want to photograph people in a state of sleep, whether it's enacted or not. And you talk about how it's a state that does feel more forgiving or something. Maybe you're talking maybe less about these kind of portraits of your influences or photographers who have influenced you, but just in general. I'm just curious if there's something you want to say.
I mean, there's something about a person, and Hujar was the master of this, but a person who's kind of reclining, and where there's a vulnerability to it, but also I'm a person who believes that a photograph doesn't reveal that much information. It's kind of like that photograph on the grave, that so much of it is projected onto the picture. So to photograph Sophie Calle, and like all you can see are the rings on her finger and her hair, but you bring something to it, or you don't. But in my case, of course, Sophie Calle's work with people in bed, I bring that to it.
So just to set up this, so we asked you if you would curate a portfolio of your influences, and we've done this before with Nan Goldin, and I thought it was such a wonderful experience putting it together, and we were so happy that you were interested in doing this as well. And I'm excited to hear you relay some of these gems that you put forth to us, to the wider audience.
I mean, it's super fun.
This Alice Neal painting.
I mean, this would be another good assignment for people watching, is make your own list of 8 or 9 photographs. A few years ago, there was a thing called Desert Island Picks, which is based on Desert Island Discs, this British radio show where you pick, I think it's the 9 or 7, in this case, photographs that have inspired you. This was a little different, where I was talking about artists that have inspired me, and then also looking for images that maybe haven't been reproduced over and over again. So at any rate, previously we had John Cage, which is with Little Brown Mushroom, which is my whatever DIY little, I don't know what it is, publishing and other stuff. We published a book with John Cage, and there's mushroom hunting. This is a very early.
Can I ask you one thing about John Cage?
Yes, please.
Because you write in the issue that you were in high school, you had a recurring dream about
I did.
John
Yes.
Cage. So,
yeah.
So you were haunted by John Cage?
It was like it was almost like a crush-like quality. It was like I was just, I mean, I don't think I'm the only one to feel this way. John Cage influenced so many different artists and so many different media. And just as a young person, it just spoke to me. He spoke to me. And so, yeah, I became kind of obsessed enough that I would dream about him. And really, I think, was the person that I wanted to meet. Yeah, as simple as that. This is kind of interesting because Richard Long, when I was young, was also this like really heavy influence on me. And I just met him a few years ago, and it was a lovely experience, because sometimes it's a letdown, when you meet someone like that. Mm-hmm. And it was really a wonderful experience, and so grateful for that. And so Richard Long, people don't know, he made work, still makes work, just going on walks. And really the photograph is just a documentation of that, or making a line, or and my feeling about my own photographic practice is that the event of it, the doing of it, is so much what it's about. And I love this kind of pure expression of that. Mm-hmm. I'm talking too much.
No, this is great.
So I have to tell you something that I just learned yesterday in an email about this picture. Do you know who the subject of this picture is? Because I did not. And I've looked at this photograph for many, many years. And her name is Michaela Murphy, and she's a photographer that like taught at Yale. And I wasn't familiar with her work, so I just yesterday was searching her work online, and she's a large format photographer, and so that was really interesting to learn. The photographer who took this picture is named Roger Merton, and he moved to Minneapolis when I was starting off as a photographer, and I've really fell in love with his work. And a picture like this, it's challenging, so it has that flash reflected, mm-hmm. and it like really acknowledges the photographer taking this picture. And he had this kind of like tough, very like clinical sensibility, but I love it. And again, that's sort of contrary to dreams, that kind of utter specificity. So anyway, I'm rambling. Wim Wenders, he probably, a similar, like a lot of these are, teenage crushes in some ways, but they live on. And Wim Wenders and his work, particularly his early road films, had such an influence on me, and his relationship to photography, which I've recently spoken about in these YouTube videos that I make. So mm-hmm. All right. So these are photographs made in a psychiatric hospital, and what's the photographer's name again? Is Hugh Welsh Diamond. Yeah. And I discovered this book when I was really young, fell in love with it. I kind of forgot about this, but R. Crumb did a series of drawings based on these photographs, which are fantastic. And this particular picture, which it reminds me of like an August Sander mixed with like that Abaddon portrait of Auden, and it's like there's something about it's the perfect picture for me. Fukasse, Ravens. It's kind of almost cliche to say it, but it's it's always been my favorite photo book, and kind of can't get around acknowledging it, and for sure fits within the theme as well. Mm-hmm. Chantal Ackerman, another filmmaker. There's something about Ackerman where like she did a film where it's just New York streets, very slow, and then these letters from her mother. And there's this kind of like looking out at the world, but always looking inside that I love. And that, I guess it's that kind of duality that's like sleepwalking. It's like being in the world, but being asleep, or being introspective.
Which I think is something a lot of us could relate to after the past few years of pandemic.
Yes, exactly. So here we have Hujar. Who found this particular picture? I can't even remember. Did you find it?
No, you did.
Did I find it? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Because we were looking for not the obvious ones. And I mean, it's a great picture. And I love that it's not just Dream World, that you have that. I don't even know what the comic is behind, but on the pillow. Anyway, it's a great one.
Yeah, it's an amazing picture.
And when you talk about vulnerability, like an exposed neck like that, that's like the definition of vulnerability. Evelyn Hofer, incredible color, early color photographer, large format, worked with dye transfer. Just the colors are unreal. And there's something about this empty street and there's something about large format photography that gives it a kind of dreaminess as well, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'm curious if I'm trying to remember your early list, because I know you talked so much about the role of literature in shaping your work, and A Pound of Pictures, like Whitman, is this through line about Stevens shows up here and there. So, poetry is always kind of referenced in your work, but we didn't end up with I'm just thinking now, we didn't end up with a literary reference, and maybe it was a space constraint, because that is one of the, I guess I would of putting together a magazine. Or did you feel like that was already out in the world, associated with you and your work?
There's a bit of that. I'm a little uncomfortable sometimes with that, because it's not like I'm this literary scholar at all. I read, but I'm not like obsessive about it. And I guess I was just going visual with the magazine as well. So.
And one of the great surprises that you brought us was this work by Emila Medková, which ended up on the cover of the magazine. And we were not familiar with Emila Medková's work. Medková was a Czech surrealist whose work spans 4 decades, basically from the end of World War II to her death in, I think, 1985. And she just made really, really incredible pictures in the context of Czechoslovakia in the Soviet era, when censorship was rampant. And how did you first encounter this work? And I'm just curious what your kind of path to Midkova's work is. Because I just want to say, one of the great things with the magazine is the way that we can use the space and the platform of the magazine to kind of, highlight gaps in our knowledge and Aperture's publishing history. And Midkova, I think, is a great example of somebody who has this amazing, remarkable body of work that's certainly deserving of great.
Yeah. Well, I think, it was a goal to, as I said, sort of open up the magazine and see something I didn't know about, and also use this issue as a way to learn about stuff and and kind of have other writers explore it. So it wasn't like I had deep knowledge, but there are just, so many female photographers, so many photographers that were like in the East that didn't get exposure, that for those reasons as well. And so all this work is coming to light in different places. And then I've always been interested in surrealism. It's interesting, in this most recent YouTube video, kind of talk about how in filmmaking, narrative is the dominant form, and something like surrealism is far less dominant. And then it's almost inverted in fine art photography, where surrealist logic is almost the dominant form. and in at least in the world of the photo book, and narrative is less common in some ways. Anyway, so I've been looking. So I'm interested in surrealism, and it's been so male dominated also. So yeah, I was poking around and learned a little bit about her work, and this was and it was just so cool to get more exposure and to see it on the cover and all of that.
And it features a really wonderful essay by the great British writer Olivia Lang, who
absolutely
to have as a regular contributor to the magazine.
And it was funny. I was looking over my my first email, or that early email to you about the issue, and I was like Midkova or Lee Miller. I was like throwing out some names, and lo and behold, there we go.
Those are two of the features. Yeah,
two of the features.
And actually, and also I love the way that your portraits of photographers at sleep or in bed, it's in some ways a kind of roll call of some of the contributors. Like in this case, Sophie Calle.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I mean, I hope it's not wrong. You were already working on something with Sophie Calle, correct?
Well, we knew that this project, the hotel, was being published or republished as a book. And I'm sure people in the audience are familiar with this project where Calle, who kind of creates these sort of real world fictions for herself, worked as a chambermaid in a Venice hotel and then took these photographs surreptitiously of the guests' rooms. So, I mean, that is one thing with the magazine, like, and it's great to collaborate with somebody like you, Alec, and bring in all your thinking, but we're also looking at, what's happening in the field right now,
sure,
publishing and exhibitions, and how can we sync up what's in a given issue with what's happening in the larger field.
And presumably, but maybe they don't, people that look at the magazine know that it's not like I was like, you must do this, and this writer, this person. It's like super
we were just following Alec's
no,
very aggressive marching orders.
No, it's super collaborative. But this was I mean, it worked out really well because I had recently photographed her. She's in my mind for this reason anyway. So yeah, great.
And then this project was also happening, which I think will be released later this year by Axud, the French publisher, which is, I think, maybe previously unpublished or not super published body of work of hers on a hotel in Paris that had been abandoned, that was connected to the Orsay train station. And I mean, obviously, Sophie Calle, in so many respects, fits the logic or the dream logic that is of the issue that you put together.
Yeah. Absolutely. So Nancy Rexroth, I mean, another theme I could have done was not just Minnesota, but like Midwestern surrealism. And this probably is the one, like,
I think that is a follow-up project, Alec.
Yeah, it's and there is a phenomenon, the kind of Coen brothers sort of aura, and this work by Nancy Rexroth, which was mostly made in Ohio, but she called it Iowa because she went to Iowa as a child. It like existed in her sort of magical dream world. It definitely has that Midwestern surrealist sensibility, and
absolutely. And I love the misnomer because it became a kind of confusing thing when we were editing the copy. Like, okay, this project is called Iowa, but all the pictures are in Ohio. And I remember, so you've worked a lot with Rebecca Bengal, and we worked a lot with Rebecca Bengal, and we did have a little bit of a back and forth about that. Like, how do we, give readers like enough kind of context to understand that without over explaining it, because the magic of these pictures is also just kind of how amorphous they are in both the aesthetic, because she's working with this Diana camera and everything is out of focus, but also just like you're not in any particular time or place, you're in her Nancy Rexroth's memory.
Totally. Here's a funny, since I mentioned the Coen brothers, maybe something you didn't know is that, so first of all, Fargo is not in Minnesota. The whole movie takes place in Minnesota. Fargo's North Dakota, but the original title was actually not Fargo. It was a Minnesota city, but no one knew how to pronounce it or could remember it, so they called it Fargo. but I also similarly, it's like a different place, which was kind of wonderful. Yeah. And Nancy Rexroth is, so I photographed her. Well, actually, there's a portrait of her in my new book as well as my last book. So I photographed her twice. And she's just a person I feel very connected to as an artist and as a human being. And yeah, I'm just a huge admirer.
Mm-hmm. And then this was a piece. Do you want to talk about this, or I can?
Yeah, you talk about this. Yeah.
So Marina Warner is a wonderful writer we're privileged to work with. And this is a piece that she has a kind of historical arc, but also an arc that kind of extends beyond photography through film, through literature, beginning with Hamlet, touching on people like Brassai, looking at the notion of the sleepwalker throughout the history, throughout different kind of cultural moments. So I think this is a kind of a great piece because she's such a great thinker, and it really kind of allowed us to think capaciously about this idea, and bringing in people like Magritte, again, connections to surrealism run throughout the issue, which is had to be a given with this subject matter.
Yeah, but what I thought was interesting, and particularly with you holding on this picture here, is that she talked about, as well as Olivia Lang, about so much about gender and surrealism, and it can be quite problematic when you're looking at the surrealists. And so it was just good. It felt good to have these writers addressing it like head on, and then Lee Miller as well. So yeah.
Exactly. And the way Marina was, I love how she writes about the figure of the sleepwalker as she calls it a real life phantom. The way it's, she said, what did she say? Filling our minds with images, but also making visible thoughts and desires, and allowing us to eavesdrop on that private movie in the mind that is consciousness.
Beautiful. Yeah. So Gregory Schneider, German artist, major artist, but much less known in the US. And this work takes some explaining, but basically he takes this one apartment, which I think is a couple stories, and the viewer, like, it's a interactive experience. So you go and you walk through this apartment, and you observe certain things, including a woman washing dishes. And then I forget how much time you get in the apartment, something like 10 minutes or something. And then you go, I think it's across the street, to another apartment, and it's exactly the same, or as close as to exact. And he's even hired a twin to be washing the dishes, and there's someone else who's like masturbating in the bathroom, and it's just, I've envisioned this so many times, and there's a book of this work, and I'm just fascinated by it, but it's a hard one on the page, so it takes a little explanation.
Right, and we were lucky to have a writer unpack it for the page.
Yeah.
And this was a great surprise too. Etienne Courtois, who I was not aware of his work before this project.
Well, you want to know something funny? So it's meant. This is crazy. So I became familiar with Etienne's work when I participated in a sort of jury kind of situation in Europe. However, he later informed me, and much later, that I had chosen his work for this Flickr contest that I did a million years ago on my blog. And
it must have been a long time ago, because I haven't thought of Flickr in a
while. I mean, it's got to be like 15 years ago or something. I did some goofy contest, and his pictures were truly extraordinary for that. And he's just, so he's working in this playful, semi-abstract but semi-surreal way. But he's also, I mean, it is interesting to know how he produces this work, and how sculptural and tactile, and he shoots on film, and it all has this physical quality. And it's just beautiful as well. All right. You want to talk about this one?
Well, Lee Miller. I think Lee Miller was on your original list. I think we were actually, I think this was a piece where we had already assigned somebody, right?
Exactly.
A new edition of a biography of Miller coming out. So we were planning something for our website, and then realized that that would work really well as an article within the context that you were creating. So obviously Lee Miller is one of the great surrealist photographers, was in Man Ray's circle, but also had just the most extraordinary life.
Unbelievable.
As a great artist, as a model, as a chef, avant-garde chef later in life. I mean, it's,
which I didn't know about.
Somebody who had so many lives, and produced the most extraordinary pictures. So it was a great opportunity for us to revisit Miller's work in the context that you created.
But so this thing about working, I'm talking about my own photography practice with this kind of like open-ended, sleepwalking kind of way, is that you're looking for coincidences too. And so that was this nice coincidence. And there were a couple of these where it's like, oh yeah, we happen to be doing something on that right now.
Exactly.
All right. So, and it's pronounced Maya, right?
Maya, yeah.
Yes.
So Maya Daniels is a Swedish photographer, I think she's kind of between London and Gothenburg. And this is, again, is a project that's requires some unpacking on the page, but it partly involves referencing the work of a photographer from the early 20th century who was a mystic and photographer. So a lot of her work is kind of unpacking just histories and stories in this region in Sweden connected to mystics and witch hunts. So it's a sort of elliptical story that she's creating. And actually, that's one thing I wanted to ask you, Alec, is that I don't know if this was intentional or not, but throughout the issue, there is this sense of elliptical narrative, of hints of storytelling, fragments, so they're always incomplete. And maybe that's also just kind of part of the nature of photography too. It's always part of something, or a kind of quotation from reality that
that's kind of what I was getting at early in this difference with the way photography has gone, or at least art photography, compared to filmmaking. So, and part of this came, I was looking at this ancient film journal from like the 1920s, and on one page is a Buster Keaton film, and the next page is some surrealist film I've never heard of. And it's kind of like the medium could have gone either way, and it went this narrative direction. And of course, photography went, it had the Life magazine moment, the photo essay, and all of that. But now it's the elliptical narrative is sort of the dominant form, and it's sort of in photography's, at least in the modern age, is sort of inherently surrealist in a way. This work is incredible. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Elliott Jerome Brown was somebody we've been wanting to publish for a few issues, and this kind of presented a really great context to bring in his work, which, is tricky to translate for the page, because if you've seen his installations, they're very sculptural.
Which I haven't. Yeah.
Photographs and, images are blown up in scale. They're mounted in really novel ways. But I love that his imagery is just kind of strangely ambiguous, and
the titles
are... and actually, that's what I was going to say too, is that throughout the issue, I think the titling with Etienne's work and with Elliot's work, the titles are these kind of they're clues, but they're opaque at the same time.
Absolutely.
And in Elliott's pictures, they maybe refer to parts of the picture, but maybe don't like encapsulate the whole.
Maybe we should use an example. So like let me see. I have the issue here. What is this? This picture is called Dish Soap in the Jacuzzi. It's like what? Like, yeah.
They're these beautiful non sequiturs.
Yeah, and it kind of like takes it somewhere else.
Abstract poetry to his titling. And then the issue closes with this really wonderful, punchy interview with.
So this steals the show, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna buy the magazine, like this is, you could do a whole issue of just an interview with Dwayne Michaels. So it's really an intense interview too. I mean, props to the person doing the interview as well. I mean, it's like really some.
Props to Jesse Doris and Brendan Emser, who edited that interview.
God,
Dwayne just has a magical gift of gab in the best way, and he's just so, every sentence is like a kind of zen, like a witticism or a zen poem.
And what I love about him and also Sophie Calle fits in this category. They're just such singular artists. There's no one like Dwayne Michaels. It's just he's created his own genre. And Sophie Calle is the same, I think.
Well, one of the questions that Jesse Doris asked Dwayne in this issue, he asks him, "Do you sleep well?" And he says, Dwayne responds, "As Marilyn Monroe said so succinctly, I sleep with the radio on." But do you sleep well, Alec?
Not lately, but we don't have to talk about that. I know. Yeah.
Okay, so we're like, that was a lot and we're moving very quickly, but I wanted to get through just at least the gist of the issue.
Yeah.
We have about 12 minutes left, and I'm sure our audience has lots of questions for you, and I see that they're coming in. People, please submit questions and we'll try to get to them. Steve Rhodes points out that the comic in the Hujar picture is Popeye.
Thank you. Good to know.
But this is great. We have people from all over the world. Somebody calling in from New Zealand where it's 6 a.m. Okay, let's see. Well, here's a question about the road trip, and they're wondering if it, like the degree of planning, like do you allow room for spontaneity and chance, and to what degree are these things pre-planned? Yeah, no, it's like creating a situation for serendipity, but it kind of relates to like pure surrealism is very hard for me. And it's kind of like just going out and driving around. It's too open-ended. I need something to chase after, and then I can get distracted. So I do lots of research, so I have a place to go. And if I do enough research and I have enough little things bopping around in my head, it'll trigger something and I can go on a detour. Our own Cassidy Paul, who's our digital editor, asks or says, "I love the comment on coincidences. For Alec, what was the most surprising encounter or discovery of putting together this issue?"
Well, that's interesting. Coincidences? I mean, the good questions are always hard to answer. I guess, so there is something to me that's fascinating about the fact that I'd made these portraits of these people, and it wasn't, because I think Dwayne Michaels was also in the works, right? That was another one that was in the works. So it was like, so Dwayne Michaels, Sophie Calle,
for a while.
Yeah, Dwayne Michaels and Sophie Calle, I'd photographed recently. They were like, they're swimming around in my imagination, and then you're working on stuff on them, and it comes together. So, and which is why prior to this conversation, I asked that we show those portraits of those artists, because they're not actually in the publication. Should mention.
Well, I
Like
would say there were many surprises for me that Alec brought, Emila Medková being one of them, but also in your influences, Roger Merton, with whose work I was not terribly familiar with, or maybe even familiar at all. So thank you for those.
Well, and that is the kind, like I said, that's the kind of thing I love opening up your magazine and just learning about these different people. And I do think from that era too, there's so many photographers that didn't get recognition for whatever reason. And yeah.
Here is a question from Denislav Popov in Bulgaria. Dear Alec, I was wondering, are you a lucid dreamer? Do you have a favorite dream?
No, so Dwayne Michaels has asked that question. And he said in that interview, he was once able to have a lucid dream. And I've tried, I've done the exercises you're supposed to do, but I've never been able to do it. But I'm great in the hypnagogic state, that in between state. I can kind of hang out in that just falling asleep place for maybe longer than usual and just kind of like drift around, but I'm not in control of it.
Let's see. How did you arrive at the order of this issue's selections?
Well, that would be your work.
I think we, so that is a great question. We usually, we sequence in different ways. We're looking for, we had a lot of conversations, I think, Alec. There was like at one point where we realized we just had so much black and white work, and we were thinking,
there's a big problem. Yeah.
Okay, we don't want this to just be a black and white issue. And so I would say that when we think about the sequence of an issue of the magazine, we're thinking about a kind of ebb and flow. You want like hills and valleys. So there's a sense of movement based on the length of a piece. But you want to create interesting transitions between stories. So either juxtapositions of work. Sometimes you're looking for like, we're going to take you somewhere completely different in the next move, or we're going to kind of hum along around a set of ideas or themes. So I would say it depends from issue to issue. Sometimes we also switch paper stocks. We're doing that less so now. And then that also sets up like a real production consideration, because magazines are produced, paper comes in 8 and 16 signatures. So we have to make sure these paper transitions work in a certain way for how the printer sets things up. But of course, first we're looking for a kind of logic across the issue. And we love the idea of opening with an interview with Alec and closing with an interview with Dwayne. We weren't going to put 2 interviews side by side. Here's a question. Would you like to do another issue, and on what theme? Maybe this is an issue on Midwestern surrealism.
Well, I'm not for Aperture, because like you got to spread the wealth, right? So that'll never happen again, I'm quite sure. But yeah, I would love to do it again someday. And yeah, Midwestern surrealism. There we go.
It does have a nice ring to it. Let's see. Here's a question. How do you continue to create work in a world of social media? Could you share any tips or comments on getting away from social media? Well, that's an interesting question for you, Alec. But I feel like you are actually very fluid in the world of social media. And it seems to me that, I don't want
to. It looks that way.
Okay.
No, I struggle with it.
You have a good social media poker face then.
Yes. Yeah. I do. No, we're all struggling with it. And I know, and I have the luxury of having like built a reputation before it, so that like if I was coming up now and trying to navigate, I have to have my work on Instagram or whatever, because I don't actually show my own work that much on those platforms. So it's tough. I don't know. God knows. I don't know the answer.
Well,
I
I think one of the really beautiful ways that you utilize social media, or at least, I don't know if YouTube counts as social media necessarily, but
it does. I think it does.
Does it? Is it okay? I'm thinking, but I feel like, and one of the reasons we wanted to work with you as a guest editor was because you are, I feel like, such a great steward of other, you advance other photographers, or you put forth the work of other photographers, or talk about it in a very generous way.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
I think your social, or the YouTube talks that you do are such a great resource for the field.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
I would say to that person that Alec uses social media in a kind of exemplary way, because you actually use it in a way that creates a conversation around bodies of work. For example, when we published a book on the work of Nigel Poor about her work at San Quentin Prison, you did this like really great analysis of the book. And there aren't that many spaces for that kind of rigorous assessment of a project where somebody's really going to focus on it and talk about it at such depth. So I think
That's nice.
yeah.
Well, it goes back to, so when I had my second child, and he had like medical problems, I was going to be home a lot, and there's this world of blogging was starting, and I was like, I'm going to make a blog, and that ended up being incredibly meaningful. It would have like rich dialogue with people, and then like Facebook killed the blog, and then Instagram killed Facebook, and but this YouTube experiment has been sort of like blogging again, where it's allowed for something more in depth, and it's been really great. But can I just say this one thing? I am desperate for female viewers. I've looked at the analytics, and YouTube it skews crazy male. Mm-hmm. So please.
That's true. That's not just your demographic watching you. That's the platform in general.
I think it's the photo world on YouTube skews male, because it's like there's a lot of like camera gear talk or something. The algorithm like pushes it that way, and it's driving me crazy. That's my only problem with it. So I want female viewers, and comment too. Okay. So I know you're there.
Yeah, well, I hope we'll have to look at, maybe we can see the analytics of who joined this talk.
Well, do you get analytics on Aperture, like as a magazine?
We do for subscribers. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask our digital team.
You don't have to lay them out here, but I think it's fascinating.
We definitely track that. Yeah, and are always asking these types of questions about how we reach new audience. And I would say, to the question about social media, that is, obviously such an effective way to bring new audience, or to earn new audience, and to get people to learn about what we do at Aperture. So I think we can end it there, Alec, unless there's anything else that you would like to add. What's next for you now? You've had a super busy year with the book and the exhibition.
I mean, I am in that daydreaming stage about the next project, and actually, I mean, if I can pimp one other thing, I'm going to be in New York next Saturday doing a book signing at ICP, along with other Magnum photographers. So a pound of pictures and Gathered Leaves, which is this compilation book that just came out. And there's going to be a bunch of book signings with Magnum photographers. So so doing that.
I did not know, so I'm glad I know now. And also, I just want to mention to the audience that there's a link in the chat if you want to purchase a copy of Alec's issue or subscribe to Aperture Magazine. And also, until June 17th, we have a collector's edition of the magazine available that comes with a signed limited edition 8x10 print by Alec, and it's one of the images from A Pound of Pictures. So it's a great opportunity to have an original work by Alec Soth. Alec, thank you so much for being such a great, generous guest editor and speaker today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You really walked me through this whole thing, so I couldn't have done it without you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Stay tuned for more from Aperture. Okay.